you had shared with me a story.
Mm-hmm.
Could you kind of start from the beginning and just talk about it a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. This is pretty much the foundation of it all. In our family, on our side, alcoholism kind of runs in the family, and my dad always struggled with alcoholism. So growing up, I was heavily influenced by my dad being in AA and my dad having relapses every few years. My dad would have relapses, and I was so close with my dad, and I still loved my dad so much, but when my dad was drinking, he was a mean person, like a lot of people are when they get shit-faced. They're mean, they're nasty people, they're just abusive, and he never was towards me, but I saw a lot of things within my household that between my mom and my dad, which was really hard to see, and it was because my dad was sick. It wasn't because my dad was sober and just a genuinely mean person, but my dad just struggled. I have a sister as well. Like, my sister coped with things a lot differently than I did. My sister's a little bit older than me, so she saw a lot more than I did, or can remember a lot more than I did. So my sister always left whenever there was a bad night. Like, my sister would never stay and be with me, when we started to get a little bit older, so I was kind of left to kind of figure this stuff out on my own and try to understand what was going on.
Psychotropic presents Elyse.
When I was 17, I began hanging out with some people my age that were kind of considered like a bad group of kids, or negative influences on me. And I started hanging out with one of my friends who was really close with a few of these older guys who were, heavily into drugs, had, criminal, past and everything, which I didn't know them well. I didn't know anything really about this huge group of people. So when I was friends with her, she introduced me to Tyler, who was ended up being my very first serious relationship, I guess you could say. So Tyler, like I said, at this time I was 17. I was starting to enter that phase where I kind of wasn't really sure who I was and who I wanted to be. And just at this time, a lot of people just began to influence me. So I kind of just was pulled into that direction with these people that I was hanging out with. And Tyler became a huge influence on me, meaning that I, fell quote unquote in love with him and, all that shit. So long story short, Tyler already had a criminal record. Tyler was almost 5 years older than I was, which at that time, no 17-year-old really has any business being with a 21-year-old convict, which is pretty messed up to say. But Tyler had a lot of issues that I didn't know about. I went into this, blind and, just stupid, I guess you could say. I was still young. I didn't know much about relationships, especially dating an older person, who had a lot more experiences than I had, obviously, being they were older. So throughout this time, while I began dating Tyler, I began befriending a lot more of these people who were all, part of the whole druggy crowd. And that's where I started getting into some heavy shit. And meaning Tyler was a huge influence on me, because Tyler already, did a lot of drugs and, was partying a lot. He knew I was young and, like, I don't want to say vulnerable, but at the same time I do want to say that, because I was already kind of, I don't want to say like a broken person, I guess, from what I was going through mentally since I was a little bit younger, and things I had already dealt with throughout that time. So starting out when him and I first started dating, it escalated very quickly. It turned very serious very fast. He was extremely controlling, and he liked knowing he had that power over me because I was younger. I didn't know any better. And I thought I loved him. I thought that's what love was. So throughout this time, we were doing drugs together, just going out, like stealing, doing a bunch of really stupid shit. And at that time I thought, oh, this is so badass, like, oh, all this stuff, like, this is so exciting,
What kind of drugs were you guys doing? Like, what was he into that he opened you up to?
Well, Tyler was on probation on and off. So Tyler always found ways to rig the system, I guess you could say, by, for example, smoking spice. Like, we would smoke spice a lot, which is terrible, which was awful. So we would always find different things to do. We would do, and like other drugs that you could kind of get out of your system faster. Like, long story short, I remember doing bath salts. I remember doing a lot of bath salts, spice, X, Molly, I think, too. At this time, I hadn't done acid yet, but nor heavily really into pills at that time yet. But pretty much that was the starting of a gateway to that whole world for me. So throughout this time, beginning of the relationship, or just having fun, I guess you could say, until things got really bad. He lost his shit. He got in trouble because he somehow failed a drug test. So ended up in jail. And then it's just so much happened at this time with him that it's hard to just pick out the boldest moments. Anyways, throughout all of this, though, he was in and out of jail. And when he started to become more comfortable, he became even more controlling. I found out that he was cheating on me. And that's when he started to get really abusive, like physically and especially verbally. He was extremely verbally abusive. And that still was so traumatic at me at such a young age that I still struggle. I don't want to say I'm scarred from it, but I absolutely am scarred from that relationship for sure. I'm still healing from it. But just meaning in the aspect of how he was so abusive and how he so easily cheated on me, and how it was so like, I can just dispose of you in the matter of seconds, like I, have you in the palm of my hand. I can tell you to do whatever, it's just, that was really fucked. But going off of that, he ended up in prison. And at this time, that's when I began becoming friends with Dara. Now, at this time, I've been a musician my entire life, and I was in symphonies throughout middle school and high school. And in high school, I got into this symphony playing flute, and Dara played the clarinet. So at this time, I was in this phase where I was already entered into that world of drugs and to that rebellious part of my adolescence, part of my life. So I was already in that zone of where I was attracted to people like that. And I knew Dara was like that. I knew Dara was like that cool, like, stoner chick, like she had face piercings, like, she had a tattoo. And like, no one has a tattoo when like you're 17 in high school, you know? And like, I grew up in the suburbs. So it's like, you know, all, you know, white kids, there's really no diversity and no diversity among like, you know, I don't want to say like aesthetic wise, but going back to no one was allowed to have a tattoo. Like, so, so anyways, that really attracted me to her. And, you know, there was a concert that we performed at, and like I just befriended her, and we found out we just had a lot in common. You know, we just got along really well right off the bat. So it started out like Dara asking like, "Oh, hey, like do you smoke?" You know, and it's like, "Yeah, I smoke," you know. So that's how we started to bond. And throughout this time too, I was still in the relationship with Tyler. So now I'm developing this friendship with her. So I'm starting to balance both of these. And they were two totally opposite people. And Dara hated Tyler because I was going through all this constant shit with him. And I started clinging to her, I would tell her everything and I would just go to her about all of it. And she didn't get it because she's like, why are you still with this guy? Like, he hits you. He tells you to go kill yourself. Like, when in this time of my life, I was, you know, in and out of the hospital for numerous attempts. You know, I was self-harming constantly, you know, and I guess that's why I started getting so much enjoyment out of just doing drugs and being in this, you know, like toxic relationship, because I guess in a way I thought that's what I deserved at that time. So I didn't know how to explain that to Dara, you know, being in that state of mind that I was. So when this all happened, it was just always a shit show with him. And she was very mentally unstable. So there were a lot of times where she would take shit out on me, you know, while Tyler's taking shit out on me. So, you know, I was always being pulled in these two directions. And so, you know, Dara always gave me these ultimatums, like, you either pick him or you pick me. And like, you need to remember all the stuff I do for you. Like, you know, I always smoke you up. I always buy you cigs. I, you know, drive you to school. I do all this shit, you know, and it's like, that was frustrating. But then again, at the time I was like, oh my gosh, she's my best friend. Like, you know, I don't know what I would do without her. So I was stuck in that. And then Tyler got arrested and then got a heavy sentencing, which led into him being in prison for quite a long time. So we kind of thought we'd make it and all this stuff. But what broke us up was the fact that I had gotten a text from that parole officer. Her name was Emily. And this was before everything happened where he got her pregnant and everything. And she sends me all this stuff. And then I was like, fuck it, I'm done. So I was finished. Like, he was in jail, you know, so ties were cut. It was done. So then at this time, this is when I completely became engulfed in Dara. And mind you, at this time too, I was still so shattered from Tyler. I was still so beaten down and just broken, absolutely broken. So I didn't know what I deserved and what I didn't deserve in any type of relationship, not just romantically, but especially friend wise. Because at this time too, I had been going through so many friends, and I was hanging out with all of these bad people, I kept on getting fucked over constantly. So like I just said, I didn't know what it was like to have an actual healthy relationship on any level with anyone, you know, not even my parents. I was so mentally ill too at this time, where I wasn't diagnosed with my BPD. I was being treated for bipolar disorder. So my medications were all fucked up. So that didn't help at all. So Dara made things so much easier by, you know, just constantly wanting to get fucked up, constantly wanting to do drugs, you know? So pretty much just started out, I transitioned from kind of a different friend group at this time, which they were a little bit older than me. They were like seniors and, kind of hippie-ish. And some of those people are awesome people. I'm still really, really close with a few of them. They were probably some of the most supportive friends I had throughout that time, So they were completely opposite of the group of people I was with when I was with Tyler. So I met them through Dara. So it simply started out with us just, smoking every day, onto me discovering pills and acid. And this was a phase where I kind of entered in my life where I grew very fond of pills, uppers, downers. And like I told you previously, I loved uppers. I loved uppers. It started out with Adderall. So we would love to buy Adderall and just smoke, just stay up all night, like just draw on our notebooks, just talk, like all this shit. And then we started doing acid, and then leading into doing more pills, heavier pills, Dilaudid, which is one of the strongest pills you could take, especially during that time. Mind you, this is in 2010, So that was a really heavy pill that we got our hands on, which was really dangerous. So this is at the point where we're just doing a lot of heavy shit. So at this time, we started doing ketamine. We loved doing ketamine. We loved going into K-holes, That was our idea of a good time,
Could you describe the first time you remember taking ketamine and what that was like, why that was interesting?
Yeah. It was definitely a very warm feeling. It was definitely extremely euphoric, very, very euphoric for me. And I don't know if maybe, I know people have different reactions to different drugs, but it was just like you go into the K-hole and you're in the K-hole, because it's like you're kind of tripping, but at the same time, like you just feel great. Like it's just that downer feeling too, and I guess it's like, it's almost like any other downer, I feel like. And it's kind of hard for me to describe different highs because I did so many drugs, and I'm so ashamed to say that, but that's like kind of how I can describe it by what I remember. Like I just remember going into the K-hole for a couple hours and just sitting with this notebook and just drawing all of this shit. And then the next day I would look at this notebook and I'm like, wow, this looked so cool last night when I was on a bunch of K. Now this looks like a 2-year-old just took a crayon and drew around. So this is where I remember things starting to get kind of weird, and this is when her and I started to fade out. She started to become friends with other people who were really into hard drugs, K. I didn't know it, but there was a lot of heroin going on at that time, which I didn't know about. So while Dara and I were heavy into K, like I said, I noticed her acting weird throughout like a couple months, and she became more unstable, more manic, and more, I don't want to say bipolar, because obviously it was from the drugs, but it was like 1 minute she would be cool, next minute she would be calling me every name in the book, would be mad because she would find out if I hung out with another friend or whatever, like, would bring up like, I did so much for you, I did this, that, and this, like just very manipulative. And I guess in a way she would gaslight me a lot. And it turned into, she took advantage of me being so vulnerable. She took advantage of the fact to where she pretty much made me believe that I would be nothing without her friendship and that I was nothing without her. And like I said, as messed up as that sounds, at this time, I was so just fucked up, like mentally, so I didn't know any better. But throughout then, when all that started, that's when I realized something was up. For example, there was one night where we went and got ketamine, and we bought it from our old friend David, who is now passed because of a heroin overdose. So she had bought heroin. She didn't tell me it was heroin. She knew I didn't know the difference between what heroin and ketamine looked like. I knew what ketamine looked like, but I didn't, there's different forms of different drugs. I didn't know. So yeah, so it was heroin, and I didn't know that until a little later on, after her and I weren't friends. And after that, just shit got worse with her, and I got fed up. I was done. Like, I was like, I'm mentally exhausted, and I can't handle you treating me like this because you're angry at me because maybe you're withdrawing, or I don't know. I didn't know, until later on, after her and I really stopped becoming friends. I found out she was heavily addicted to heroin because one of our friends had contacted me and told me, like, hey, Dara's in jail because she got arrested with heroin on her when she got pulled over, So that was mind blowing to me, because that's where I, drew the line. But after that, her and I both went our separate ways.
It kind of sounds like you had gone from one toxic relationship with Tyler into another toxic relationship with Dara. And
Yeah.
the common themes between these two people were, one, they sound like they were pretty possessive and abusive.
Mm-hmm.
And they also like drugs, and they like to expose you to drugs.
Yeah.
Was this something you ever gave thought to afterwards? Like, did you kind of notice these commonalities?
Definitely. Dara just wanted someone gullible to do drugs with her,
And you had mentioned that you felt like this is what you deserved.
Yeah, absolutely.
Why did you feel that way?
How do we kind of put it? I never had self-confidence to start out with. I always thought really, really low of myself. And I think that's why I immediately didn't think I deserved much, like I had been let down so much before that too. Like I like my very first relationship, like it was, I was 15 at the time, like I trusted him and he cheated on me. So automatically from such a young age, I already felt, let down in so many parts of my life, like growing up where, I think it honestly just stems from when I was younger. I was just constantly let down by my dad, because that promise of, oh, I'll stay sober, just all these broken promises, which led into, these, it's so hard to describe. I hope this makes sense. But it just started out where I was just really broken from the beginning. And I had no self-confidence. So that made me think from the get-go, I don't deserve it. Like my first boyfriend, I don't deserve a good relationship because there's someone out there better than me, and when you don't have confidence, you don't realize how much that affects every aspect of your life. And when you're treated so poorly by so many people, and I'm excluding my family from that entirely. But when you're treated so poorly by friends, close friends that you trust, after the first few, you just think like, I just must deserve this. And then that's just easy to believe, and you just run with it, you know?
This episode was produced by me, Philip Johnson. All songs used can be found in the description section of this episode. If you liked what you heard today, please subscribe. Also, rate and leave a review wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you'd like to write in and tell me what you think, or if you'd like to check out some psychotropic related merch, or if you have a story you'd like to share, you can do all this at psychotropicpodcast.com. If you'd like to get an idea about the content of the next episode, you can do this by following Psychotropic Podcast on Instagram at Psychotropic Podcast, all one word. Thanks again for listening, everybody. See you next time.